Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Boatman, a Thriller, by Dustin Stevens, narrated by Charles Constant. Revenge is an act of passion, vengeance of justice. Injuries are revenged, crimes are avenged. Samuel Johnson. Crystalline spatters of sleet hit the windshield, leaving a scattershot pattern across the glass. Each time they connected, the distinct ping was the only sound inside the car. They accumulated until the outside world was almost obscured from view, before the wipers rose and shoved them to the side, the rubber stripping whining as they retreated back into position. Seated behind the wheel, he waited motionless, his gaze never wavering as the precipitation gathered and was cleared in equal 30-second increments. Parked in the third row, he knew he was virtually invisible as he sat and stared at the front entrance to the chapel. Slumped low behind the wheel, the windows fogging around him, there was no way anybody could have seen him. If not for the occasional burst of the wipers, there would be no indication at all that someone was inside. His car, just another anonymous sedan and a lot full of them. One by one, automobiles around him emptied their passengers, people jogging to the front entrance, using umbrellas or papers to protect themselves from the falling ice pellets. Once they reached the steps, they lingered only a moment, greeted by a solitary man in dark clothes before disappearing inside. Sliding his backside toward the edge of the seat, he sat and let the cold chill inside the car seep into his bones. It passed through his thin, black suit and brought goosebumps to his skin. On the seat beside him rested an unopened bottle of Jim Beam Devil's Cut whiskey and a loaded .38, both of them calling with equal intensity. Both seemed a cruel irony, a harsh contrast to the person who normally occupied the seat. Someone who was now tucked away in a pine box less than 100 yards from where he sat. Despite knowing that, realizing everything she had meant to him, everything he would miss about her, he remained where he was, unable to move, watching as the last few stragglers from the parking lot made their way to the door. As they passed inside, the priest stood and waited, seeming to look directly at him in the third row, imploring him to come forward. When no movement came, a bow of concession was offered before he, too, disappeared inside the chapel, the door closing without a sound. Still he remained, watching, waiting, before reaching out and turning over the ignition. Without a second glance, he drove away, his tires leaving twin tracks through the slush behind him. Chapter 1. From his perch in the alley, the boatman had a perfect view of his target. Crouched low on the second-floor fire escape, his body pressed against the cool brick of the building, he sat and stared through the iron bars at the small house across the street, waiting. He had been in position a full 4 hours, not once moving as he stared down at his destination, an exercise in form and discipline. After the first hour, bits of cold had started to pass through the flattened cardboard box he was seated on. An hour after that, the jacket he wore gave way to the cool brick behind him, his spine tightening from the chill. Just before midnight, a thin mist had passed through, cloaking the world in dampness, his clothes sticking to his skin. Still he sat and waited, letting the beads of moisture collect on his head and drip from the front of his hood, paying them no attention as he stared across the street. As targets went, there was very little to distinguish it from 1,000 other identical ones around Columbus. A single story tall, constructed entirely in red brick, it sat on a postage stamp-sized lot. Most of the lawn was reduced to nothing more than mud, tufts of dead grass sticking up in the corners. An old pizza box served as a makeshift covering for a broken window, light shining out around the edges. It was the fourth night in the past few months the boatman had sat on his perch observing the house. There wouldn't be a fifth. Just shy of 1 in the morning, a pair of headlights appeared, refracted up from the wet asphalt of the street. Feeling his pulse rise just slightly, the boatman drew his feet up beneath him, his knees groaning in protest. Ignoring the objections of his body, the boatman pressed his back hard against the wall and pushed himself upright, watching as the lights drew closer. There was no doubt they announced what he had been waiting for, the only person who would possibly be out at such an hour. Without waiting for visual confirmation, the boatman swung himself over the wrought-iron railing encasing the fire escape and dropped to the ground, his shoes falling silent against the wet earth. Keeping himself tucked into the shadows of the building, he jogged forward, his body bent in half, moving as fast as his crouch would allow. In the dead of the night, the headlights cut a stark beacon through the quiet neighborhood as they drew closer, the pounding of a stereo system growing louder in accompaniment. The boatman made it to the corner just as the car came into sight, confirming what he already knew. He watched as it turned into a driveway and the blinding glare of the front lamps fell away, revealing their source to be a faded burgundy Cadillac coupe. A hint of a smile crossed the boatman's face as the brake lights flared, the car easing its way off the street. Tonight had been a long time coming. Too long, in fact. The kind of thing slowed first by inability, then by indecision. Only once both were overcome was he able to move forward, this the first step of many more to come. On the opposite side of the street, no more than 20 yards away, the Cadillac came to a stop. A moment later, the dull throbbing of the bass receded to nothing, the silence noticeable in its wake. From his hiding spot, the boatman drew in one final breath. Never before had he been in a situation like this. Not ever had he felt more certain of anything in his life. There was no tremble from his hands as he reached back over his head, gripping the braided handle of the sword strapped there. In one movement, he slid it from its scabbard, the polished steel coming free without a sound. An inch at a time, the boatman rotated it from side to side before him, letting the slightest bit of light from the street lamps reflect from its surface. 60 feet away, the driver's side door of the car burst open, a spray of cans and bottles hitting the pavement. Their owner spilled out behind them, his gait uneven, the streetlight above flashing off his exposed arms and clean-shaven head. The boatman watched as the man kicked at the debris scattered across the driveway, his uneven flailing giving away the fact that he had had a few too many on the night. Just as fast, he gave up on the venture, muttering a string of obscenities that was audible along the street before slamming the door shut behind him. Using the sound of the door as cover, the boatman sprang from his spot, crossing the road in 8 long strides, covering the small front yard in half that many. There was no sound from his feet as he moved, no pause from his body as he closed the distance to his target. Chapter 2. On an exceptionally hot evening early in July, a young man came out of the garret in which he lodged in S Place and walked slowly, as though in hesitation, towards K Bridge. The narrator's voice was deep and rich, bringing to mind images of James Earl Jones, minus all the heavy breathing used during his stint on Star Wars. Without even thinking about it, Reed Mattox reached across the front seat and took up the plastic CD case, flipping it over in search of a picture.
He had successfully avoided meeting his landlady on the staircase.
Unable to find anything more than a one-sentence blurb for each the author and the narrator, Reed tossed the container away, watching with disinterest as it hit off the seat and landed on the floorboard. The noise brought a stir of life from the back seat. Reed, glancing into the rearview mirror as a pair of pointed ears came into view. Beneath them were chestnut-colored eyes, 2 moist discs staring back at him. "Easy, girl," Reed said, his drawl allowed to slide out in full, a voice meant to placate. It seemed to work, as the creature met his gaze a long moment before dropping back out of sight, her size shifting the car as she moved.
This was not because he was cowardly and abject, quite the contrary.
3 paragraphs was as far as Reed made it before reaching out and shutting off the disc, letting silence fill in around him. Once more a whine could be heard from the back seat, though this time no eyes appeared to stare back at him. Shifting onto his right haunch, Reed twisted his legs beneath the steering wheel, resting his elbow on the middle console. He jammed a thumb into his mouth and gnawed on the nail as he again checked the clock on the dash, watching the minutes crawl by. Everything about the situation he now found himself in, the car, the dog, the CDs, all of it was new to him. Even after 2 months it felt odd. Things seeming just a bit left of center, not quite attuned to what he was used to. Little by little, things were improving, but they still had a long way to go. "Detective Mattox?" the dispatch radio on the dash called, the metallic din of the voice reverberating through the interior of the car. "Detective Mattox." Reed waited a moment before drawing the thumb out of his mouth, spitting a bit of nail onto the adjoining seat and reaching out. He took up the microphone hanging on the side of the radio and drew it over to him, his movements slow and deliberate. "Hey, Jackie." By day, the procedural protocol for handling the radio was a tightly regimented exercise in tedium. In the preceding months, though, Reed had become intimately aware of the fact that most such procedures were cast aside after midnight. "How you doing out there this evening, sugar?" Jackie asked. A flicker of mirth passed over Reed's face as he imagined Jackie on the other end of the line, her feet propped up on the edge of the desk, a half-eaten box of powdered doughnuts beside her. On her lap was most likely the latest gossip rag, picked up on the way to work at the local CVS. As humorous, if not cliched, as the mental image might have been, Reed was long past commenting on it. Everybody had their own way of passing the hours in the middle of the night. Jackie preferred pastries and smut mags. He was now trying audiobooks. "Living the dream," Reed replied. "What's going on?" As much as he didn't mind Jackie and knew she meant well, he was fast coming to loathe the way she called to check in on him. It grated on his nerves in a way he couldn't quite pin down, making him feel defective, like there was a flaw obvious to everybody around him. "We've got a report of a possible 187 in your neck of the woods," Jackie said, her voice as bored and detached as if she were reading the weather. 187, police code for homicide. Reed pulled himself up straight in the seat, his bottom moving flat onto the cushion beneath him. In the back seat, the dog sensed his change of demeanor, rising to full height, just her ears visible behind his head in the rearview mirror. "Where?" Reed asked, his voice carrying a bit more of an edge than intended. There was a long pause, long enough to let him know it was heard and not appreciated, before Jackie said, "The Bottoms. You want it? Or should I call and wake up Ike?" The starter whined in protest as Reed cranked the ignition, the car rumbling to life. "We're already en route," Reed said. "Just send me the address." Chapter 3. The flashing lights of his car bounced off the front of the house as Reed pulled to a stop, the headlights flickering from the left to the right every few seconds. Given the hour and the lack of traffic, he had opted to run without the siren, letting the flashing headlights clear away what few other drivers were on the road. The house was a simple ranch affair, the kind filling scads of neighborhoods in the greater Columbus area. He himself had grown up in something similar on the outskirts of Oklahoma City, had seen the same thing in towns ranging from Atlanta to Portland. Somewhere inside he knew there was a family room with a connected kitchen and dining room, 2 or 3 bedrooms off a hallway from the main living area, and 1.5 baths showing up somewhere. The front lawn was nothing more than a dust bowl that had been turned into mud by the passing rains, the outward condition of the windows and front door showing the place was in a state far past disrepair. Flipping the lights off, Reed took a quick glance down the street, confirming what he knew about the area, even if he had never been at this particular location before. The house was one in a line of single-family dwellings, all equally spaced, all having the same basic design. On the opposite side of the road were multi-story buildings that looked to have at one time been apartments but now appeared deserted. Like the houses they stood facing, everything was red brick, splashed liberally with aging graffiti. "Stay," Reed said, leaving the keys in the ignition and stepping out of the car. A thin mist enveloped him, clinging to his hooded sweatshirt, beating up on the badge hanging from his neck. A single blue and white patrol car was parked at the edge of the driveway, a dozen feet in front of Reed's sedan. Halfway down the asphalt drive sat a burgundy Cadillac appearing to be from the mid-'80s. From everything he'd seen of the block so far, it seemed to fit in perfectly. Huddled together in front of the patrol car was a pair of officers, both turning to look as Reed approached. Neither one seemed happy to be standing there, neither making a move forward as Reed drew near. "You guys call in a possible 187? Reed opened, closing the gap between them, letting a hint of annoyance show in his voice. "Called in a definite 187, the man on the right said, taking a half-step forward and meeting Reed just past the front bumper of their patrol car. He thrust out a hand and said, "McMichaels, my partner Jacobs." Neither man appeared to be older than the mid-20s, most likely paired together once their training years with a senior officer were complete. McMichaels was tall and lean, his face clean-shaven. Behind him his partner was shorter and a bit fleshier, a thin goatee encasing his mouth. Reed accepted the shake, noticing it cold and wet from the weather, and nodded to Jacobs. "Detective Mattox." "No partner?" Jacobs asked. It wasn't the first time Reed had been asked the question, each time drawing the same clench in his stomach, though he had learned to mask any outward display. "In the car." A moment later came the second part that always grated him, the two exchanging a glance. "Canine," Reed said, answering before they had a chance to ask. "So what makes you say this is a definite 187? The two officers exchanged another glance, both of them drawing their mouths into tight lines. They stood that way a moment, Reed looking from one to the other, before both turned back to face him. "Just walk a little way up the drive," Michaels said. "You'll see." Agitation continued to grow as Reed looked at them. He opened his mouth, prepared to offer a lecture on proper police procedure, but decided against it. Almost certain was the fact that there was a body lying nearby, quite possibly their first. Not that long ago he was in their position, unsure how to handle it, staring at death for the first time. The last thing he would have wanted then was a senior officer acting like a prick about it, and he'd be damned if he did the same thing to them. Not that he gave a shit what anybody on the force thought of him anymore. "Scene secure?" "Yes, sir," McMichaels said. "Nobody around." Reed unsnapped the flashlight from his waist and drew it up to shoulder height. He clicked the rubber stopper on the end, and a cone of halogen light shot forth. Halfway down the driveway, he paused a moment, listening for the sound of footsteps. None came, both men content to let him proceed alone. Whatever was waiting for him clearly had them both spooked. Slowing his pace to a half-step at a time, Reed came up alongside the Cadillac and aimed his flashlight inside. The interior was in even worse shape than the outside, the seats cracked and peeling, the floorboards covered in garbage. An ashtray sat in the middle of the dash, cigarette butts overflowing. No body. Shifting the light back to face forward, Reed walked to the front of the car and stopped, his breath catching in his chest. After 12 years working for the Columbus Police Department, he had seen just about all there was to see. Every possible form that evil could take he had encountered at one time or another, far exceeding anything he thought humans capable of. Even at that, this was a first. Rooted in place, Reed raised the light, letting it splash over the remainder of the driveway. 6 feet of cement in either direction, rimmed by more muddy yard. In the center of the space, lying flat on his back, was a single male victim. He wore pants and a white-ribbed tank top, his head shaved bare. That was about all that Reed could confidently ascertain. unable to move any further, the combination of blood and rainwater having painted the entire slab of asphalt red. A bit of warmth rose along Reed's back as he moved the flashlight over everything once more before retreating a step. After another, he clicked off the light and turned back to the curb, both officers waiting with folded arms across their stomachs, looking at him expectantly. "How'd you guys find him?" Reed asked, his voice carrying through the silent night. "Anonymous call came in," McMichaels said. "We were on patrol in the area and fielded it. Said it was a DD," Jacobs added. "We got here and found this." DD, domestic disturbance. More than once, Reed had seen the excuse come in. Somebody out for a run or taking their dog for a walk stumbled across something and made an anonymous call, not wanting to be near the crime scene any longer than necessary, thinking they didn't know anything that would be of use anyway. "Any ID yet?" McMichaels looked down at his feet as Jacobs shifted his weight from side to side. "Not yet. We'd only been here about a minute when we called for you. We didn't want to disturb the scene." It was obvious from his tone that the last sentence was added as an explanation and an apology of sorts. Reed let it go with a nod, conceding that in instances such as these it was better they did less than more. If the victim did have an ID on him, the techs could pull it in half an hour. If the patrol guys had gone ahead to check for themselves, they could have destroyed evidence beyond repair. "What do you need us to do?" McMichaels asked, looking up from his shoes, a bit of color having returned to his cheeks. Reed turned and glanced over his shoulder, again picturing the scene behind him in his mind. "Cordon off the whole place, yard and all. I'll call in the crime scene crew. Sit on it until they get here, and at first light start canvassing the neighborhood. I want to know everything we can about this guy and if anybody saw anything here last night." Both men nodded at the directive, each appearing thankful to have some heading, even more glad it wouldn't put them anywhere near the body. 187? Jacobs asked. Turning to his car, Reed was already moving to call in support. "Definitely." Chapter 4. The rear door wrenched open with an ugly screech of metal scraping against metal. Reed was careful to stand back as he held it wide, positioning his body to avoid the solid black bolt that shot out. Once she was gone, he shoved the door closed, turning to watch his partner sprint across the park, covering enormous swaths of ground in long strides. After 2 months together, both knew the routine. Reed turned and rested his back against the side of the car, waiting as she pounded out a few revolutions of the park. At 6:10, it was still too early for anybody else to be using it, nothing to stand in her way as she sprinted in an oblong loop, a solitary black streak tearing across the field. Most nights the weather was nice enough that Reed had her out a fair bit, working patrols. On evenings like the one before, the city blanketed in mist, him caught up in a crime scene, she stayed in the back seat for almost 10 solid hours. Shaking his head at her insatiable energy, Reed brought his palms to his eyes and pressed down hard. He held the pose long enough for stars to begin dancing behind his eyelids, the odors of the crime scene lingering on his clothes. The familiar sense of blood and garbage flitted across his nostrils as the sound of a car approaching crept into his consciousness, the slight squeal of wet brakes being applied. Dropping his hands away from his eyes, a shudder passed through Reed, the wet fabric of his hooded sweatshirt clinging to his body, his skin clammy to the touch. For a moment he considered stripping the garment away before thinking better of it, opting to wrap his arms across his chest, drawing himself in as tight as possible to maintain a bit of warmth. He didn't bother to look over as the driver of the car exited the vehicle, her presence announced by the sound of heels clicking against the pavement. One of the more ironclad rules in the Columbus Police Department was mandatory psychiatric meetings following the loss of a partner. It was something Reed had fought and begged and pleaded to be set free from, requests that had all been summarily dismissed. The best he had been able to finagle was an agreement with his attending doctor to meet him at the park a couple of mornings each week, blaming his schedule for not wanting to go to her office. "Good morning," Piametti said as she approached, her hands thrust into the calf-length brown coat swirling around her.
"Morning,"
Reed said, not making any movement away from the side of his car. "How are you, Doc?" "I am well," Meddy replied. "And yourself?" Reed turned away from the question, watching as his partner went about her business, paying them no mind. After 2 months, she had learned not to take the doctor for a threat. "Last night was a big one for us," Reed said, nodding toward the field. "First homicide together." He could sense a shift in the woman by his side, her body moving but coming no closer to him. "Yeah? And how was it?" she asked. On the whole, Reed had no problems with Meddy. In her early 40s, she was a stylish woman with light brown skin and glossy black hair, the kind of look that could have made her a lot of money in Bollywood. She had a direct manner that he appreciated, and had been accommodating in meeting him so early in the morning. Still, it was the requirement that they meet he resented so much, the insinuation that he needed some sort of evaluation to ensure he was still a capable lawman. "Fine," Reed said, shrugging his shoulders. It was the first body he'd come across in nearly 4 months. The sight of it had done nothing to his system, his heart rate remaining even, his breath never once picking up as he'd helped to process the scene. As he did, though, he couldn't help but feel a small twinge in the pit of his stomach, the slightest hint of something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was clear there was something missing. His former partner Riley's absence, an enormous void that made the entire thing feel incomplete. Just as apparent, though, was a tiny jolt deep within him. Whether or not that was a good thing, he had not yet decided. "Same old thing," he said, looking over at Meddy. She met the gaze before giving him a look that relayed she didn't believe him, though she wasn't about to press it. "And how did your new partner react?" A bit of a smile pulled at Reed's lips as he turned back to the field, his new partner still sprinting circles around it. Her name was Billy, a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois, solid black, her dark brown eyes the only exceptions. In a previous life she had been a military dog, a bomb-sniffing machine deployed by the Marines on 2 tours in Afghanistan. 6 months prior, her handler had been killed attempting to defuse a roadside IED. After his passing, the Corps had tried to keep her on, working with different disposal experts, but the pairing never stuck. She was cycled back stateside and soon thereafter turned over to law enforcement, finding her way to Columbus through a combination of dumb luck and timing. "Unfortunately, the scene was pretty messy," Reed said, "so she had to be kept back. That's why she looks like Usain Bolt out here this morning." The comment drew a small smile from Meddy, though the mirth showed in her mouth only. "Are you sure that was it?" she asked, a cautious tone in her voice. "Or did you just prefer to go it alone again?" When Reed first moved over to the canine unit, he too had gone through a couple of new partners, never once finding the right fit. For his first month on the job, he went solo, a dog patrol detective without a dog, waffling between waiting for the right animal to come his way and debating calling it quits altogether. Whether or not the two were actually a good pairing, or if both just knew they were down to their final option, Reed wasn't sure, but he was willing to take a chance on finding out. Thus far, Billy seemed to be up for the same. "Not at all," Reed said. "This was legit. A lot of blood, a lot of mud. Not the kind of thing we could risk footprints through just yet." Once more, Meddy nodded, Reed again getting the impression she still didn't quite believe him. It had been the same situation for the better part of 2 months now, both settling into their respective roles, Reed stonewalling as much as possible, giving just enough to offer the illusion he was trying, Meddy pushing where she could, backing away whenever it became apparent he was blocking her out. "I see," Meddy said, lifting her foot and nudging a rock with the toe of her shoe, her tone betraying just the smallest bit of frustration. Chapter 5. The day had yet to start, and already Captain Wallace Grimes looked like he could use a drink. Dark circles under his eyes, and his tie was loosened 1/2 inch from his neck, the fabric twisted to the side, hanging at an odd angle down his chest. He was on the phone as Reed appeared at his door, tapping with the back of his knuckles, notebook in hand. Without verbal acknowledgment, Grimes waved him in, a scowl on his face.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?